Hello, y'all. Welcome back to Marvelous Mondays. Thank you, Ketel One, another round, another rally, Portland Cocktail Week, for having us again. My name is Fanny Chu. This is Little Bowie. I am the head bartender at a transportive tropical bar in Brooklyn, and this is my marvelous co-hostess with the mostest, Amy Ward. What's good in Chicago, Amy?
Thank you so much, Fanny. Chicago is lovely. We're here for another Marvelous Monday. Today, we have Eric Bennett. I'm very, very excited to talk with him. Eric hails from Birmingham, Alabama, and from what I can tell, he is one of the busiest humans throughout the quarantine times right now. In no particular order, he is a bartender. He's the owner of Paradise Chow, a late-night tiki truck, a member of the Tales of the Cocktail Grants Committee, a very proud dad, and a home gardener of many things, especially tomatoes. So today he's here to share with us the totally trellis tub of tomatoes, a container gardening adventure. Eric, welcome.
What's going on? What's going on? It's good to see y'all. It's good to be here. Yeah, this is exciting. Welcome from Birmingham. Hello from Birmingham.
Cool.
All right. So let's get started, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think the place to start for me is just to talk about what this is. I grow things in my free time. It started off as my wife brought a plant home and we were trying to not kill it. And that one plant multiplied into multiple plants, lots of plants inside. So almost to the point where a thing that was supposed to be relaxing became, oh wow, I gotta take care of these plants. But then, not to be outdone, I've always wanted to grow a bunch of stuff outside, and so we're in the process of making that happen in our house that we've renovated and doing all the things. So yeah, it's been a crazy plant journey, and this year has been sort of the biggest harvest year of things, of food related plant life for me. And so it's been cool to make things with the food that I have grown. And ultimately it all connects to what real hospitality is, in that, like, you know, when you toil to create and to nurture a food item, it gives you a lot of respect for those that do it. For us at the bar, on a macro scale, both those small and especially those large producers. So big shout outs to supporting your local farms, especially Black farms. That is what is hot in the streets right now. So definitely support them. Go to your local farmer markets and show them love, because they are growing great things for you. But today we're talking totally trellised tubs of tomatoes. So let's basically what we're going to do is just talk about how you can grow tomatoes also. And that's really the main thing, is wherever you are, whoever you are, you can grow tomatoes every year. You can do it.
Year-round.
And especially doing it in a container. So whether you live in an apartment, whether you live, you know, anywhere that you live, you know, I have a house here, whether you can find some space next to your bar, whether you can find some space anywhere, you can grow some tomatoes, especially in a container. And that's what we're just going to talk about. That's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about, like, first just tomatoes, what they are as a plant, because that's important. That's really where we have to start. And then we'll talk about containers, different sizes, the types, how you prepare them, soil requirements, both for the tomatoes and for your containers, because that's important. Picking the right plant. So whether you start from seed, which is an ambitious choice, but an awesome one if you decide to do it, or if you go pick out a transplant, you know, sort of the pros and cons of doing both of those. We'll talk about how you feed your plants, because they need to eat just as much as we need to eat, and what fertilizer works for that. We'll talk about watering your plants, because that's the most important thing. That's how they eat. That's how they get the nutrients that we work so hard to give them, and how we do that is as important. We'll talk about pruning your plants, because actually that's also important. You got to get rid of some stuff so that the good stuff can grow. And then we'll talk about harvesting them, and ultimately we'll make a delicious Bloody Mary with some tomatoes.
Sure.
That sounds good, right? All right, so let's start. Tomatoes. So Solanum lycopersicum, that's their,
Fancy pants
real
name.
name. That's their government name, if you will. They're a vining plant that is indigenous to Mexico and Central America and North South America. So they are ours, and that is as a plant varietal goes, it's always awesome to have a plant that is from where you are. They work better here. So that's what's fun. On the like weird side of it, tomatoes are members of the nightshade family. So most people think of nightshades when they think of the nightshade family of the non-edible variety, they think of poison. The good thing about tomatoes is that they're delicious, and any of those alkaloids that are toxic, by the time you get a ripe tomato, you don't have to worry about that. In fact, for most tomato species, any part of it is ultimately fine. You're not going to eat enough tomato stuff, whether they're green tomatoes. I'm from the South, fried green tomatoes are like a thing.
Yes.
So you're not going to eat enough fried green tomatoes for real to actually have some issues. So don't worry about that too much. And then specifically, the tomato plant itself, it's what's called a decumbent. So it is a vining plant that natively sprawls along the ground. And so what that means is that, let's see, I've got a sad tomato here. I've been trying to keep it going in this tiny little pot, and then I didn't water it yesterday, so now it is sad for us today. But it's okay. It's all right. It's going to get the purposes done.
It's like a Charlie Brown tree.
Yeah.
That's right. It is like a Charlie Brown tree. But if you see up close right there, those little hairs that are all along the plant, those hairs are what allow the tomato vine to exist in the real world. Mm-hmm. From any point on the plant, it can produce roots. So anywhere that plant comes in contact with the ground, it can produce roots and propagate itself, because ultimately that's the goal of all plants. We eat the fruit, but they're trying to survive. So that's what they do. And so that means that these are pretty resilient plants, but the way in which we grow them, we can make them even better. We can make sure we protect them and keep them doing what they're supposed to do. So technically speaking, when it comes to harvesting tomatoes, there's two types of tomato varietals that we eat. There's what's called a determinate tomato, and this is like, if you ever watch a YouTube video about growing tomatoes, this is the thing that they say every time. So after you watch the 10th video, you're like, I got it. But we gotta cover the bases. So here we go. A determinate tomato is the first type. They are a cultivar that is more bushy, like they're more bushy, and you really don't have to trellis them because they grow more like a bush instead of just continually growing. And what makes them special is that they flower and fruit all at the same time. So your harvest for the plant happens like one time. I mean, it's not really one time, but like it happens at one time. Yeah. But the other type, your heirloom tomato varietals and sort of your old school tomatoes, if you will, are called indeterminate. These plants will grow until the cold says no. So what that means is that these plants have to be trellised because they will continue to grow. And again, normally that's fine as a vining plant on the ground, but we want to eat that fruit and don't want pests and things getting to it. So that's why you trellis it. That's why you build a cage or something for that vine to vertically grow as opposed to horizontally grow. And then they will fruit from maturity, again, until frost. So yeah, and even technically speaking, if you live in a temperate enough climate, they can last multiple years. Like they are not an annual, technically speaking. They are a perennial. So
is that what makes them more expensive? Like, because heirloom are generally the more sought after, pretty expensive wherever you're buying it within the farmer's market.
It depends, but yes, technically they are more expensive because, and heirloom varietals specifically tend to be sometimes a little bit more expensive because they are specific strains of tomatoes that have been cultivated to produce some very specific traits over the course of many generations. And so on some level, you're paying for that sort of back end work. And so when you eat a if you eat a wow, like all tomato varietal names just went out of my brain for a second. I was like, boom, there it goes, and we're gone. But if you were to eat a Black Prince tomato, which is a like purplish brown, when ripe, awesomely umami forward, larger tomato, that tomato has come a long way in the moral of the story. And as an heirloom varietal, it means that they there's no genetic modification. They're taking a lot of pains to make sure that tomato is what it is. And so that's where that pricing comes in. But also, you can also find heirloom tomato seeds and transplants that are super cheap too. So I'm all about that super cheap. So but yeah, and so that also brings up a thing that I didn't say. When we're eating tomatoes, the tomatoes themselves come in a variety of different sizes, and that can help you choose which tomato is right, or which tomato varietal is right for you. So everything from a cherry tomato, which is a cherry tomato. We've all had a million cherry tomatoes on our salads. They're tiny. Some pack a lot of flavor, and whether you get a hybrid or an heirloom varietal, whatever, you can get some really, really great things from a cherry tomato, and they're the most versatile. So if you have a windowsill outside of your 6th floor apartment, you can grow a tomato on that. A cherry tomato is probably going to work best there. And if you've got a little bit of space for one of these larger containers that we're about to talk about, then you can go to a bigger size. So there's cherries, there's grape and plum sized tomatoes. So those are tomatoes that are usually a little bit bigger than a cherry tomato. They also are typically more used as like paste tomatoes. So they're not necessarily as juicy in some cases. Again, there's like a million different tomato varietals. So, but in some cases, they're more like a paste tomato, meaning you want to cook those down, and they're going to give you all that flavor in a package to cook with. And then your big tomatoes, are sort of come in 2 names: slicers or beefsteak. Which beefsteak was an heirloom varietal, and now people just call all big tomatoes beefsteak. So it is what it is. And so those are your big tomatoes. They don't grow in clusters as big, but they're also awesome. And we use those for our sandwiches and for our tomato pies and all the things. Yeah. All right. So that's tomatoes. Let's talk about containers, because we're going to grow these tomatoes in containers. And that's the next logical step, just talking about what you need. So first, a tomato needs a little bit of space to grow in. Ultimately, the root system for a tomato can grow up to 1 foot long, and they will take up as much wide space as you can once they start growing. And so you need a container that is deep, that is big. I recommend at the minimum, you really want like a 5-gallon container.
Yeah.
For that tomato. So that root system can make sense. A 5-gallon container could be a really awesome ceramic pot, or we live in batch bucket world, so this is the win. And I think there may be a picture that I have that we may be able to pull up if we can, of 2 of the tomatoes that I'm growing in batch buckets. It's sort of a race. I live in Alabama, and when you live in Alabama, you have to make a college football choice. My wife went to Auburn, so that's an easy choice for her. I have been an Alabama fan for my entire life, Roll Tide till we die. I mean, I went to Methodist school, but it doesn't matter. So we put 2 of our tomato cultivars in batch buckets for funsies, because we had a few of them this year, and to see which one grew the best. Sadly, we had a mid-season injury to my Alabama plant, so it looks a little bit. This is an early version of these plants, and then we had a storm issue, but it's back and healthy again. Just not quite as big as our Auburn plant, but both are producing really well. And in order to do something in a 5-gallon bucket, the most important thing, because it's a bucket, is that you have to drill some holes in the bottom of it so that it actually drains. I think there's also a picture of that, which is the next one that looks weird under that. Yeah, so, just drill some holes in it. I drilled 3 very large holes in it, comparatively speaking, but smaller holes, 10 of those, you want to make sure that just that water can drain out of your bucket and make that make sense. But in the real world for us, from my containers, sorry, reaching down, we use a 15-gallon container. So this container is a fabric container. It's 15 gallons. And we are only putting 1 plant in each of those 15-gallon fabric containers. Fabric containers are really great because they do a couple of things. As far as the root system, the roots sort of get to the edge of the fabric container instead of a plastic container or any other container sort of traveling down and you're getting that sort of root bound situation. They are what's called air pruned. And so essentially they are cut off by the air because of fabric interaction. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is that those roots then start to differentiate even more. So you get actually more root activity because they're being pruned and constantly taken care of. So when we talk about pruning later on for the top of the plant, your fabric pot is doing that for the roots, which is actually really healthy and awesome for them as well. Also, a space-saving hack could be a milk crate lined with landscape fabric. So a milk crate is a 12-inch by 12-inch by 12-inch cube of growing space, which is like in the basics of gardening in boxes. That's like how you learn how to do that. And so it's an easy way to grow a tomato as well. So you've got a lot of options is the moral of the story. But make sure that each that's right. But you want to make sure each tomato has adequate space. So, in that 5-gallon bucket, you're really only putting one. I mean, in our 15-gallon bucket, we're only putting 1 plant and letting it sort of really utilize the nutrients of that soil, really utilize the root development space as far as that goes. But again, like we said, drainage is most important for any container. So as long as there's drainage holes in it and it's big enough, you can grow a tomato in it, which is really what's awesome. And then those larger containers allow you to stake a little bit easier depending on the type of varietal of tomato that you have. But again, you want to, that's the idea, is that you're going to have a container, you're going to clean it out, you're going to wash it if it is a hard container. So if it's plastic or ceramic or terracotta. Terracotta pots are great because they actually allow a lot of drainage as well. Sometimes too much drainage depending. So for fabric pots and terracotta pots, you want to make sure that you have a good watering schedule. We'll talk about that. Yeah. And then as you notice in all of those, in that picture, all of the containers, regardless of what they are, there's a little bit of mulch at the top of them. That's going to be important for holding in that moisture, whether any type of container that you have. So we want to make sure that we leave a little bit of room in that container for a little bit of mulch. So this is pre-mulch, and then that other picture is post-mulch, if that makes sense. All right. Any questions on the containers? It's pretty straightforward, honestly. So that's the easy part. The rest is where it gets a little fun. So let's talk about feeding plants. Let's talk about how plants eat. Traditionally tomatoes are called heavy feeders. And so, you have to use a lot of fertilizer. You've got to, make sure they, who knew, right?
Heavy feeder.
I identify with the tomato very much then.
For sure. Heavy feeder. I'm down. Is it time to eat? It's time to eat now, right? And basically, when it comes to fertilizing your plants, you want to use, I'm going to go ahead and say, you want to use organic fertilizers. They are better for the environment. They are better for your plant because they break down slower. But then more of those nutrients and those chemicals in the organic natural fertilizers, but are more actually available to your plant. So they may be a tiny bit more expensive in the short term, but in the long term, your plant will be better by using organic fertilizer. Okay. And ultimately, the idea isn't really, I know I've said that we're feeding the plants. We're really talking about feeding and conditioning the soil. Your soil is what makes all of this work. If your soil is bad, then that's bad.
Bad
Oh,
moving.
speaking of which, that's the thing we didn't talk. I was like, I skipped over something to talk about feeding. Soil. Hey. So
Not a fertilizer on it. Call it a day.
yeah, just fertilizer. It's all it needs. Really, it's just yeah. So soil is important. So let's we're gonna pin feeding them up here and talk about your soil for just a second. We're talking about containers. So the thing that's important for growing in containers, anything that you're growing in a container, is that you want to make sure that the actual soil itself is not compacted, so that that means that airflow can get into the soil. This is why for like your indoor plants, they recommend that you repot them every couple of years. It's not because your soil is necessarily depleted. It's because it's become compacted over excessive watering over time. So you want to make sure that. Say that again.
After a while, right?
It can. So that's a thing too. You want to make sure. So your soil. Why your soil is important is because you want a soil that both allows water to flow through it. And gives room for the roots of your plant to move through it, but also that retains enough water so that the plant can continually eat and drink, if you will, over time. And so a lot of the times when you have mold in your soil, especially near the drainage holes, it is because in a lot of cases, either it's the soil itself is staying too wet. There's too much water or moisture content, which obviously is attracting the mold and in some cases fungi and other things that can be in your soil. And so that's why it's important to get the right kind of soil. So the right kind of soil is potting soil. When you go to fill up your container, whichever container you have, with soil, get potting soil. Don't get you get potting soil because it has like vermiculite and other usually rock pieces that help to aerate the soil, which allows again that water to flow through, and as well as things like cocoa coir or peat moss or other things that will hold on to so you get this combination of things that will hold on to the soil, things that allow water to run, hold on to the water, and things that allow water to run through, so that your plant can feed but not drown, which is the goal of the story. Does that make sense? That was a lot. Okay.
It's the tub life.
It is. It is. Like you want to be comfortable. You don't want to be really up to your neck all the time. So, but yeah, so so that's the soil. So going back to feeding them, then what we want to do is make the microbiome of that soil the most conducive to your plant getting all the nutrients that it can. So first, just a quick fertilizer 101. Most fertilizers, here, let me see. Okay. Most fertilizers have on their bag or on their whatever 3 numbers. Those numbers, in this case, the 463, those 3 numbers are important because they tell you sort of what the fertilizer is all about. Those numbers stand for, in order, NPK. So nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So in general, those elements, what they do, nitrogen helps like the overall growth of your plant. It helps for leaf development. It helps your plant get bigger. Phosphorus helps your plant's roots grow and get bigger and better. It helps your flowers and any sort of fruiting element you have also develop more, not really quickly necessarily, but better. Helps them to be better and the best of their ability. That's right. Yeah. And then potassium is sort of the catch-all. It contributes to overall plant health in general. It has a lot to do with stomata and how your plant literally breathes. But that is sort of what the potassium is for, right? And so those numbers that are on your fertilizer bag, they are one in a ratio, and that ratio tells you sort of what that fertilizer, what's important to that fertilizer. So if there's more nitrogen in that fertilizer, then in those 3 numbers, if that's the highest number, then that fertilizer is really there to help your plant grow, get bigger, do its thing. Or if there's more phosphorus, it's definitely, in this case, for a tomato fertilizer that I just showed you, it's meant to encourage flowering and develop root growth, encourage better set fruit. And then you typically won't see a higher potassium fertilizer if they exist. You can get only potassium fertilizers that are organic and natural and all the things. But that you will want to do a soil test to make sure that you really need that. Like, that's usually not a thing.
Do those components, like the reaction between the chemical effects, does that change the temperature of the root and soil?
So I wouldn't say that it changes the temperature. And what really is happening is just like when we are eating, or these nutrients are being brought into the soil. So especially when people talk about fertilizer burn, what's really happening is that the plant is taking up too much fertilizer, and it's causing essentially the plant to OD on fertilizer and die, is the moral of the story. So it's destroying tissue because there's too much of the fertilizer. It's not actually like a heat thing. And typically speaking, because you're working in a container, what's great about containers is that for a plant that we are growing that needs warm temperatures in general, the temperatures of a container are always going to be higher in a lot of cases than the temperature of the ground. So that's going to allow for easier, especially if you're talking about small plants getting bigger, before we talk about fruiting and flowering and all of that. It will help the plant grow a little bit better and easier, if that makes sense. And then you can start earlier, which each plant has a certain amount of time to become mature, and so that will help with that too. So by growing in a container, you are sort of helping that temperature regulation thing happen as well. But yeah, so and then just like when we eat, we don't just need macronutrients. We need all kinds of organic and inorganic compounds to.
You're speaking my love language right now.
I mean, it's all. This is like, it's the same. We're gonna eat them, so we need to make sure that they are well fed, so that we can be well fed. It's that circle of life that is real. And so there are obviously other nutrients and micronutrients that are important. Everything from magnesium and calcium specifically for tomatoes. A lot of people say, oh, well, you need to crush up eggshells in your soil so that you can have more calcium available to your plant over time, so that you can prevent this thing called blossom end rot. That's not really where that's coming from. It is a calcium deficiency, but it's based on your watering. So when we talk about watering in just a minute, we'll really hone in on that. But yeah, so what is, there are other micronutrients that are important, and then there's a symbiotic relationship that happens between certain bacteria and fungi and mycorrhizae that allow for the plant to better uptake these nutrients. And so when you buy a potting mix, which is what we talked about on some level, from the store, it doesn't have any of that in it. Most of them don't. And so when you fertilize that soil in your plant, you want to add that, so that, again, the plant can be healthier, those roots can be healthier, they can acclimate a little bit better to their new containered surroundings, and really make that make sense. And so the best fertilizers have that, have those things in them. And the best fertilizer, ultimately, is one you can also make yourself all the time: compost. Compost is like the thing. If you have a really well done compost, and you can make compost, you can grow a plant anywhere, you can make compost anywhere. Sometimes it's a little bit more stinky in certain situations than others, but you can do it. Yeah, that's right. It's just it's just you're decomposing food scrap, so it is what it is. But a good layer compost has all of those things in it, besides also potentially having like worms, which help aerate the soil, and whose waste also helps to feed your plant, and other things working with it. Like compost does everything that a fertilizer that you buy can do. But it's also nice to augment your soil in very specific ways. So, for a tomato plant, it's important that you have, again, when it's time for fruiting and flowering, you want a little bit more phosphorus available to the plant. And so, like, augmenting with that helps. But yeah, compost is your friend. You should make it do that. And basically, we're going to talk about again in a second. Let me see where yes, okay, yeah. Now I see where I went wrong. It's okay, but we're gonna catch up on all the things. But yeah, so what's going to be important if you are growing your plant from seed or from especially a very, very small transplant, you may want a little bit more nitrogen in your compost or in your fertilizer to allow that plant to actually grow and develop and get a little bit bigger. But really, once you are transplanting into a container where you are doing it, you want that higher phosphorus compost amount to make that make sense. And I didn't say this, but the actual numbers themselves correspond to the amount of each of those elements in that compost bag or whatever, or liquid by weight. And so a 1-1-1 fertilizer is the same as a 5-5-5 fertilizer as far as concentration or as far as ratio. It's just obviously the 5-5-5 is higher concentrated. There's more of it in that.
Different ratios?
What do you mean? Oh, yeah. So like this one right here is a 4-6-3. And it's got a bunch of mycorrhizae in it and other things. So it's one that I recommend. There's another one as well, like Joby or something like that. That again is different. I want to say that it's like a 2-5-4. Like they're almost the same, but not. So, but the idea is the same. That you're really focusing on overall health and that phosphorus for fruiting and that sort of thing. But then, I have a liquid fertilizer where the ratio is, it's like 0.15 to 0.3 to, like, it's specific. So it's like you can really find anything is the moral of the story. There are fertilizers that are specific, and then especially when we talk about when you find organic sources for fertilizer as well. So like bone meal would be all nitrogen. There's no other. I mean, that's what comes from that. But then there are others that are you can sort of mix and match and figure out what you want. Just like in cocktail making, there is no recipe. There is no recipe. It's just like you really, at the end of the day, can make whatever you want. It's just about making it taste exactly what you want it to taste like. The variability on what you can do as far as growing something is real crazy, depending on how you want to get into it. And so you can fine tune your. That's right. Yeah, you can fine tune your feeding regimen for your plant to absurd levels if you want, and that's the joy of doing it, really. So we talked about like growing and that. So let's sort of back up a little bit, and before we talk about watering the plants, let's actually talk about going out and getting the plant, because that's the thing that is the second most important thing in real life. So the easiest way to get started growing a tomato is to go to a nursery, go to a farmer's market, go to a big box store, wherever, and get a plant that is already a plant. Go and get something that looks way better than my Charlie Brown tomato plant. Here. And that's the thing. When you go look at it, oh yeah, see there's one. That's when it looks awesome. There you go. Great job. But yeah, you want to get a plant where the leaves look really healthy and green. You want to get a plant that hasn't started flowering yet. That's actually really important. So you want to see leaves. You don't necessarily want to see a flower cluster just yet, because you don't want a mature plant. You want a plant that's right on the cusp, if you will. And then what's most important too is, here, I'm gonna lift this out for a second. and show like, so this plant is pretty root bound, as you can see. Oh yeah,
Mhm.
there's soil right there. It's because I've had this plant for a while, sort of in anticipation. Friends weren't able to take it, and then sort of anticipation of doing this, we sort of kept it around. So yeah, it's grown, but the roots are this is not what you want to see when you pull the plant up. When you pull it up, you want to see like healthy roots. You want to make sure that they're all brown and juicy and awesome. None of them look like they are rotting or mushy. But you also want a plant that doesn't have this much cover inside the pot, because that's usually not a great sign. Also,
You want it to have that lush life.
Hey,
I mean, you know. But yeah, so and that's the easiest way to start. It's that, I mean, going and buying a plant means that all you have to do is transfer it into your amended soil that you've just bought, and that's the easy part. If you want to be a little bit more ambitious and you are very specific about the type of tomato that you want, and maybe they're not available at any of the places where you went as plants, then you can also start a tomato from a seed. I mean, technically speaking, you can eat a tomato and start a tomato from that seed too, or from a tomato that you are actively trying to eat, after you ferment a little bit so that the gelatinous outside goes away, and then dry them. Then you can. But yeah, so the internet is your friend, and there are some great resources for seeds, and especially for heirloom varietals. Everything from there's a place called like Urban Farmer to actual homestead farms that they don't actually produce food, they produce seeds, and so they're trying to make sure that they are propagating those lines of heirloom tomatoes and heirloom vegetables in general properly. But yeah, so starting from seed, what's great about starting from seed is that you have complete control over when you start. Like you get to control that plant from start to finish. I mean, as far as like getting it started and getting it going, and like your hands are in every aspect of it, which can be very rewarding. And then you know, when you actively go to start a tomato plant from seed, you're normally going to start more than one, because you want to make sure that you get a tomato plant that germinates and grows and does what it does. So it gives you the opportunity to grow multiples of the same variety for sure, or even you can mix and match and try and grow a bunch of different things if you're trying to grow multiple things and do multiple containers. So it gives you a lot of flexibility and control over the process. The cons to starting from seed are that you have to use more equipment. It takes more time. Everything about it is more intensive. So equipment from like actual smaller grow pots and things. I mean, I actually found a hack yesterday that uses like the 2-ounce like condiment cups that we all have, or that restaurants have. I have because for the fruit truck, and you use that to germinate the seed with a coffee filter, like super hack, like cheap super hack, which I'm about. And then you take that germinated seed and then transplant that into the either a second pot before your giant container, or even potentially in your giant container. Which I was like, that's cool that I saw that last night and didn't really put that in here in a way, but you know, we got it in time. So
you did perfect.
Exactly. But like you can need like heat mats, because peppers and tomatoes like a warmer environment as a seed to germinate in. They want their soil to be warmer, like 70 degrees or above. So you know, grow lights so that you can actively control the amount of sunlight if you don't necessarily get enough sunlight in the place where you do it. It's just more intense and labor intensive. So but you know, again, that means if you grow from seed, it also means that you know, for us, our last frost date is usually around technically speaking around the end of March, and so beginning of April. And so you could potentially start your seeds inside, or I could potentially start my seeds inside, and then by the time that last frost hits, put those tomatoes in the ground, and then by the end of April have tomatoes. Which is crazy. It's the timing on that has to be perfect, but like it's possible. And so but yeah, so that's, you know, at the end of the day, whether you grow from a seed or you go buy the plant, you're going to take this plant and you need to put it in a pot. So in order to do that, the soil in your container first needs to be pre-wet. We want to reduce the effects of transplant shock for the plant. So a lot of times what happens when you move any plant to a new container, a bigger container, smaller container, or whatever, it's a different container. That plant says, hey man, I was happy living where I was, and now you're moving and taking me somewhere else. So it's important that you say, oh, it's okay. I've got everything you need to make sure that, this new home for you is going to be really great. And so you do that by moistening your soil, to be honest. That's the first thing you want to do. And then when you get your plant and you're going to put it in your container, the question is, like, where do you put, like, a lot of times when you plant a plant, you take the plant out and then you put it in a pot and then put it back. And it's like, that's where it is. That's where the line of the soil is in your pot. For a tomato, you don't want to do that. You actually want to go deeper, if you will. So you want to bury your plant, in the case of this plant right here, you want to bury it up until the first leaf. You want all of that in your container. Arguably, for this one, looking at it, like if you really were to try and bring this one back, you would almost go to this leaf. You want a good, you want a good 6 inches of plant inside, because again, like we talked about earlier, those hairs on the stem will create more roots. That means that your tomato plant will be more stable. It means that you got more access to root fiber for taking up those nutrients and getting bigger and better fruit at the end. And so you definitely want to get a little bit lower or dig a little bit deeper for your plant there. Pre-moisten the soil and make sure I'm saying everything. But you, like I said, up to the first true leaves, and then you want to go ahead and stake your plant. Like so, in the picture of the batch bucket college football containers that we have, my staking system was fancy and then real DIY. So the fancy ones for the large containers were these. It's a triangular adjustable staking system that, so as the plant grows, you can move the legs up. You can see sort of in the back of that picture the green. So those are like, it's a metal rod, and like those work whether you're doing it in containers or whatever, like super fancy. And then those plants outgrew that trellis, and I had to go super DIY. And then that's when we decided to do the other two. And so the stakes for the two batch buckets it's just a bamboo pole. I have a neighbor that has a lot of bamboo, I guess. I don't know. They cut some down and then put it behind my house. And so I said, okay, well, that's free. I'm going to take that. And so I cut it down and made it make sense to use as a stake for those. And then if Leah, if you can go to there's a wide shot of sort of all of the plants, I think. It's probably, it might actually, I should probably look to because
how many sides are you ideally trying to get when you start staking things? I see like the triangular version of the green one, single stake together.
I think it just depends. So either with the single stake, you're going to use a little bit of twine to just loosely tie the plant to the stake and have it continue to grow vertically.
There you go.
Whereas that triangular trellis gives you the options. You can actually guide the plant through the trellis if you want to sort of make it easier for you to look at and do. You can just sort of use it to prop up the plant as it grows straight up, and does, it gives you a lot more flexibility in how you want to do it. And so at the end of the day, it's whatever works easiest for you. And like I said, so these tomato plants that I have are they grew a lot, like a stupid amount. And so in order to what I did was we took real 10 foot bamboo poles, put them in the ground, and then I use like a biodegradable wire or line to essentially weave through all the plants to help them, sort of get stuck staying up. And then the goal was to, once we got to the top of that, which they did, to have them sort of fall forward and then start just like dropping down to one side, which for 4 of those plants worked perfectly. And for one, he lives his best life, I guess. So
my parents have one of those ones that coil up.
Mm-hmm.
But they also like have tomatoes that grow upside down, and I don't know how they did that.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool. Again, the options are limitless to what you want to do. So hanging a tomato vine versus having it grow up, it's the same as far as the tomato is concerned. It's doing, as long as it's getting enough sunlight and all the things, it's doing exactly what it should be doing. But what it means is that you have the base of the plant up higher, and then you can, when it comes time to picking that fruit, it's right where you are, which is convenient. Versus in some cases, a trellis that goes upwards, that gets to be a little bit crazy and more difficult. You've got to get your ladder and just kind of figure out how to move around your plant and make it make sense.
Is it hard to retrellis?
And again, say that again.
Sorry, is it hard to retrellis everything, or like you have to be really gentle?
Yeah, you have to be really gentle is the moral of the story. And so the earlier you can start that process, the better. Because once the plant starts being the plant and doing what it wants, it's harder to tame it. And again, was the case for us as well this year. We had one plant that just didn't, we were like, oh, it's fine. We've got those trellises in there. It's going to be great. And then by the time I put it, actually grew slower than the others, and then had a growth spurt that made it go not where it was supposed to go. So again, it's like, all right, well, we're just, like I said, just going to make it make sense. So, and again, when we were talking about these trellises, when you go to like a big box store and you buy your tomato plant, they all have those like wire trellises that are available. They're a little bit, they're not the best because they're pretty flimsy. But if you have a determinate tomato varietal, then those work really great because your determinate tomato is not going to get crazy. It just needs maybe just a little bit of support versus something like I said, these indeterminate tomatoes that we ended up growing went ham. So we want to make sure that you have a trellis system in place that makes sense, and then if things decide to go left, that you have a contingency plan. But yeah, all right. So picking out the plant, that's the again, you want to make sure you get a healthy plant to start. That will help you have a healthy plant going forward. So we've talked about picking the plant. We talked about the soil, the containers. Talked about feeding the plant. Watering is the most important thing because your plant can't receive those nutrients without water. But again, as we talked about, it's that tub theory. You don't want to put too much water on them because they don't want to drown the roots. They want to be happy and healthy. And so the biggest thing with watering tomato plants is consistency. I'm not a scheduled person. I like kind of just like, we make it make sense and get things done. And like, there is a schedule, but it's not like, it's tomato plants like a schedule when it comes to water. And, that is not hard and fast because, this year for us, we've gotten a lot of rain. And so that's definitely changed how I water this year. But you want to make sure that tomato plants get water consistently. And it will avoid issues both with the fruit and with pests. That's why, as well as allow for the best uptake of those nutrients. So we're trying to grow healthy plants while also avoiding pests and making all of that make sense. So typically speaking, every time you water, you want to make sure that you water the plants deeply water the plants. It's not like, oh, we're just gonna, put the hose on them for just a second, or I'm just going to put like a cup of water in it and call it a day. You want to make sure that water is coming out of the drainage holes if it is a container that has drainage holes like that. For a fabric pot like mine, you just want to make sure that all of that soil is getting a good drenching. But like cold brew coffee, you want to water slowly. You don't want to just like dump a bunch of water in and say, good luck, guys, like here you go. You want to make sure that all of it, because basically what's going to happen is that those nutrients are going to become water soluble, and then all that water is going to drain away really fast as opposed to being taken up by the plant's roots. And so you want to, like cold brew, just get it nice and slow, but nice and deep at the same time. And then like for me, my schedule for my tomato watering is I water every 3 days. If there is rain, like a substantial amount of rain, which we've been getting because of storms and things, then obviously we push that. And so I'm trying to take into it, and just like with any plant, the easiest way to determine if you need to water it is to go stick your finger in the pot, get down in there, and if it's 2 inches, if you can stick your finger in and 2 to 3 inches and it's all still dry, then you definitely need to water your plant.
Yeah.
And as Charlie Brown will tell us, your plant will tell you if it needs to be watered. This plant needs to be watered. Obviously, the leaves are curling. It's drooping a little bit. That is, and if you live in a climate that's super hot, sometimes in the middle of the day you'll see this, and then in the afternoon it'll perk back up because the sun's not so hot and it's not as crazy. So you want to just kind of when it doesn't perk back up, that's when you know it definitely needs water. But if you stay on that sort of schedule, that loose schedule, then that will make sense as well. And then once the tomato starts fruiting, once you start getting tomatoes, you can actually pull back whatever watering schedule you have. So like it's August. Yeah, it's August. Time's a flat circle. So it's August in Alabama, and so it's humid. We've had a lot of rain. It still gets up, 90, 100 degrees in the middle of the day, but it's not as sustained as it has been in some years past. So, which is great. Which like I was anticipating having to water every 2 days, potentially even every day at one point. But we're good. And so my watering schedule has made sense, and my plants, the ones that are not that one, look really healthy and really awesome and are fruiting and doing what they're supposed to do. Yeah, like after the fruiting begins, you can bring that water consumption down a little bit, because the goal, when you water the plant, and especially when there's fruit, that water travels up the plant and goes into the leaves, but it goes into the fruit too, which makes the fruit get bigger, which is a good thing, but it also dilutes the flavor. So by pulling back that water schedule just a little bit, you can help to concentrate those flavors in the fruit so that when you pick it, it tastes like an awesome homegrown, delicious tomato and not a real ridiculous watery one that you get at the grocery store, and that's really the difference. So typically speaking, when a lot of people are like, oh, I grew this tomato and it didn't have like the flavor that I was anticipating, it's probably because you were still watering it a lot. And so there's just a lot of water in the fruit, and so that has diluted that flavor a little bit. But again, that consistency. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. What about the kind of water that you use to water it? Do you leave because tap water has fluoride in it, right? Have you ever put a bunch of water out and just let it evaporate so that you would just the next day you use it for watering?
Sure. And that's a thing you can definitely do. I would say, in my experience, when it comes to tomatoes, don't worry about that. For a lot of my indoor plants, that is like a real thing, and we've had to figure out ways to make that make sense. But for especially for things outside, they are in the elements and they're consuming a lot of stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. So I mean, at the end of the day, that fluoride isn't as important. And again, with modern cultivars and things like that's just not as much of an issue as, say, a bird of paradise plant that that you have inside that is, finicky, or a calathea, or those. Anyway, but yeah, so I would say that like as long as you have, and again, you can always have your water tested and make sure that like it's not crazy. But and if you are growing these tomatoes like in your apartment or on your stoop or in that sort of situation, obviously if you're not using a giant container, then you're not really going to be watering with like you don't need to like hose it down necessarily, but you still want to make sure it gets a deep watering all the way through. And so because there are a lot of variables, that's sort of the thing to take in mind, to keep in mind is yeah. And then by keeping that consistent schedule, you're going to prevent that blossom end rot that we sort of talked about for a second, which was what happens. The tomato on the bottom of the tomato, like the blossom, it's really the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom of the tomato starts rotting, gets brown, gets dark, and then like it could cause the entire tomato to be inedible. And that is it is actually from a calcium deficiency, but the calcium deficiency is becoming because you are not watering you're not getting consistent calcium uptake throughout the plant because your watering is erratic. If that makes sense. And so, yeah. And then like cracking for the plant, like so tomatoes that like they'll be growing and then they'll, especially when you buy them potentially at the farmer's market, there's like a giant, like the tomatoes opened up and it's tried to heal itself on some level, but like that crack in a tomato is from you being in a drought condition and then watering the plant or overwatering the plant momentarily. And so the fruit takes in all of that water and then bursts a little bit. And it's like, oh, okay, we're going to try and hold it in. All right, yeah. And then, if we do it again, it'll continue to crack. Yeah. So again, consistency is everything when it comes to your fruit health. Then the thing we haven't said is when you are watering your plant, you want to make sure that you are watering the soil and not the plant. You don't want water hitting the leaves at all. Tomatoes, the leaves and even technically on some level the stems, as a plant are highly susceptible to fungal and bacterial diseases. And when you spray the plant or if it rains and it's super humid, then your plants can contract these diseases. The most well-known is blight. Maybe think Interstellar for that too, but like, blight is a fungal disease that comes from the soil. So, if you have splashback, that's why we also mulch so that you reduce the amount of like water splashing back up onto the leaves when you're watering and that sort of thing. But those spores, whether they come from your physical soil or anywhere in the environment, will land on the leaves and then essentially cause your plant to rot and die. And it'll look like you'll have like little bullseyes on your leaves, and it can infect the fruit as well. It's probably the most prolific's really the wrong word, but like it's just everywhere. So this plant has a few different things going on, but that yellowing is a little bit of blight. That's what that is. It also got attacked by some caterpillars that we'll talk about in a second, but that yellowing is the beginning of blight. And so like, I feel like I've done a great job taking care of my plants, but one of those plants with all this rain and humidity and, this is where we live, of mine had, as of this weekend, a large outbreak of blight. And so there are a couple ways you can take care of that. And that brings us to the idea of pruning your plants. Because you can prune your plants to get rid of some disease. You can prune your plants to help them grow better and grow straighter and be healthier. You can prune your plants also to help your fruit actually ripen and things like that. And so it's important that throughout your development of this plant that you prune it. And there are a couple of different ways and things that you need to prune. First, if you have a determinate variety, you don't really need to prune your plant because then you're just lessening the amount of fruit that you get at the end. Because a determinate varietal blooms and fruits all at the same time, you just let it kind of do its thing. It's only going to be a bush and then it's done. So after it becomes mature, like it's done, it's not growing anymore. But for indeterminate varieties, you're definitely going to want to prune your plant often, at least once a week is really the way I look at it. So first, for airflow, you want to prune the leaves at the bottom of the plant. So when your plant, you grew your plant or you buried your plant to here in soil, and so not immediately, but almost immediately, you're going to want to cut this leaf branch off, and then probably cut this branch off and this branch off, so that airflow gets through the bottom of the plant. That's helpful, obviously, one for just evaporation and things, but the tomatoes like airflow. If there's just too much, if there isn't airflow, then they just can't. I can't think of words right now. Carbon dioxide exchange doesn't happen as efficiently, and so you want to make sure that through all parts of your plant as it's growing, that airflow, but especially at the bottom. And again, that also helps from splashback when you're watering. That's why we mulch. That's why we do those things, so that you can see that I've cut the limbs off pretty high up on this plant, just to make sure again that there's airflow, and two, that there's no splashback, that we're keeping that plant safe. So usually about 12 inches from the soil or mulch line, so we talked about blight. One way to you can obviously cut the blighted leaves off, and that's a thing where you don't have to cut off the whole branch. Like if it's just one leaf, cut that one leaf off and you're good. And you want to continue to check up on your plant and do that, just to make sure that because blight is a fungal disease that can actively kill the entire plant. So we're trying to harvest all these tomatoes for as long as we can. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of that. But if you notice that you have a large sort of outbreak of blight, there are some fungicides and things that you can spray on your plant. Definitely dilute them heavily. There's also some homemade versions of those types of things that you can do. Really, it's baking soda with a little bit of dish soap and cooking oil and a lot of water. Those are the ingredients. The ratio is one that you can find on the internet. But it's 2 tablespoons of baking soda, a little bit of dish soap, about a tablespoon of oil. The oil helps the baking soda stick to the leaves. The baking soda change and water itself actually allows kills the fungus, is the moral of the story. But when you do that, if you spray anything on your plants, it will stress them out. And so you want to make sure that it's sort of when you're spraying your plant, you're like, all right, I'm making sure that this plant doesn't die and that I can continue getting fruit. It's sort of your last resort in that situation. With spraying anything plant, because it can cause even neem oil and horticultural oil, like those things. Your plant can freak out and say, okay, well I guess we're done here. So you don't want that. And then going back, you can also cut off some damaged leaves. So from the holes in the leaf that you saw were from the larval stage, or the caterpillars from moths that love plants, love tomatoes specifically. But and so there are a couple of different actual pests. One called the tomato hornworm. There's a tobacco hornworm. But they're the moths themselves are harmless, great pollinators on some level for us, but their larvae can cause major damage to plants, and they will eat lots. They'll eat whole leaves in days. So as far as those pests themselves, when you see them, just pick them off, and something you can decide if you want to kill them or not. Obviously, if they are alive in some way, they could reproduce on your plant, but it's fine. We don't have to necessarily kill them. But those leaves are, if they do a lot of damage, you can go ahead and cut those leaves off.
Okay.
In this case, this is some damage. I will definitely cut that blighted leaf off. And then the rest, they look like they're kind of okay. We'll kind of keep an eye on them. If anything else happens to them, then we can go ahead and cut those off. But the most important way to prune your indeterminate plant is to prune what's called a sucker. So I think there, Leo, there's a picture of a sucker is your plant's growing, you have your main stem, and you have a leaf that grows off that main stem. And then in sort of the armpit or the shoulder, depending on your point of view of that plant, at a 45-degree angle is what is called a sucker. And they're called suckers because they, in terms of the tomato plant living longer and getting bigger and doing what it's supposed to do, it's great. It allows that plant to get bigger and do what it's, and fruit more and all of those things. But for us, it takes energy away from sort of that main stem of fruit or of the tomatoes that we want to concentrate those flavors in as far as fruit goes. And so a sucker because they are growing at that 45-degree angle between the stem and the leaf branch. And that the main stem is like sometimes, so maybe it's been a week since you've been out to look at your plant. Yeah, so this guy right here going at a kind of a 45-degree angle, close enough. That portion of this, you want to cut that off is the moral of the story. And you can either pinch it off if they're young or use some shears or whatever to prune them off. When they get bigger, sometimes it's hard to tell where the main stem is. So when you get to this point, you'll know the main stem because the next thing on the main stem will be flowers versus the sucker, which will be more leaves. And so, at the end of the day, there are a million ways you can choose to. You could let your plant do its thing and not prune them, and you will still get fruit, and they could still be delicious, and that's fine. Commercially, most farmers try and allow the plant to have either one main stem, which is called a single leader plant, when it's just the main stem, you have your leaves and fruit coming off those leaves, or they'll do a double leader, which so the first sucker that forms near the bottom of the plant, you allow that one to become sort of a secondary stem, and then you prune off the suckers off of it as it grows. And Leah, literally, one picture above that, yeah, perfect. So the growing end of a tomato plant looks like this. So this is a sucker growing in, where you have the formation of flowers and then more leaves, and it will continue to grow until frost. If you cut this off of the main stem, it could stop the plant from growing further in some cases, especially if it's a single leader. And at the end of the season, you want to do that because then the plant will focus on putting its last bit of energy into whatever fruit is left. But indeterminate plants are plants, and at the end of the day, they want to live and do the best they can. And so, let's say there's, in my case, I had damage to a plant really early in the season, like a month after we put them in the ground or in the container. And so, the top of the plant was broken off. I was like, oh no, this plant's not going to do it. But life finds a way, as some might say, and it forms suckers that allow the plant to essentially have a new main stem, and now it's the one that's out of control. But it is what it is. And so you want to prune these suckers. Yes, you have the ability to get more fruit and all of that from them, but it will make the plant a little bit more unwieldy. And at the end of the day, you're going to get a lot of harvest from a plant with 1 or 2 leaders. You should
heard that.
Yeah. I think that is all for pruning, which leaves one last thing, which is harvesting the tomatoes.
Yay!
Taking your tomatoes. Yay, we finally got here. So we put a lot of love and effort and work into growing a tomato plant, and the reward is a healthy, awesomely delicious tomato. And so like those flowers that we saw in pictures, when they form, you can help that fruiting process when if it's early in the morning I didn't say that, which reminds me, early in the morning, great time to water your plants, water your tomatoes. in the afternoon, early evening, a great time to water your plants. Don't water them in the middle of the day. Don't water them at night. Again, just want to avoid pests. But yeah, these flowers, when you are in the morning and it's cool, it's not really above 90 degrees yet, give them a little shake, tap them a little bit. That will help them pollinate, and you can get more fruit that way. So it's sort of a manual aid. Obviously the best bet is planting flowers around having other flowers and things for your around your tomato plant that attracts pollinators and that sort of thing. But everyone loves a helping hand. So yeah, give them a little pat and you can help more fruit to set. And then you're gonna pick this awesome tomato when it finally comes and is ripe and awesome. You're gonna pick those in the afternoon because again, it's all about that flavor concentration. So we want the sun of all day sun that plant was able to get to concentrate those flavors. So when you pick it, it tastes at its ultimate best. And then you'll know ripening fruit. This is a great picture to look at right here of these cherry tomatoes, Valentina cherry tomatoes that we're growing. At the end of that vine, you've got these green fruit, but that they are starting to ripen because obviously the ones before them have. The one at the top is close to being ready. I would say we probably gave that one after this picture another day to get just a little bit more ripe on the vine. And that's kind of the fun of picking tomatoes. You can pick them at almost any stage of ripeness. So as long as they have started that color change from whatever they start out as. So in most cases it's green, and then they will transition to another color, but there are exceptions. Once a little bit of color has come into those tomatoes, you can pull them, and especially if you need to keep them around for a while, they can ripen on your counter. You can put them in a paper bag and ripen them like other fruit and things and vegetables that you have in your home. But or you can let them stay on the vine and get the most awesome and pick them then, which obviously is the best bet. But again, choices. And so you can feel free to prune that cluster. Obviously in these tomatoes, which are a version of a sun gold tomato that is not sweet, which is weird. And so I don't know if I love, the tomatoes are great. They're not, we're probably not going to grow them again next year. It was sort of a happenstance thing that we got them. But you could, once this starts to ripen, you can pick the whole cluster, or typically what we do is at the end of every day, we go in and do a little tomato inspection and go through and pick what is right. And then obviously the certain varietals have different clustering types. And so like these varietals as cherry tomatoes and as these specific varietals super cluster. I mean, you get like 20 fruit in one vine section. But then obviously your larger tomatoes are going to be maybe 1 to 2 or 3 per cluster, and all that matters on the picking end is that they're ripe and delicious and protected from pests as well, so to make sure that you can eat them. I mean, it's great to feed the other animals, but I think we want them after all that work. But yeah, so that's at the end. That's really it. You get to enjoy the literal fruits of your labor by growing these tomatoes and doing it. So how's that sound? That was a lot. We kind of talked about a lot of things.
That was a lot, but it was incredible.
Yeah.
Cool.
So now I'm curious to see what it looks like when you put that bad boy together and make yourself some bloody.
Yeah, I think we should do that. So the next step is taking those tomatoes and making a Bloody Mary. And I'm the kind of person that thinks, oh, you should probably make a large batch of the mix and then add your delicious Ketel One to it. And that way you've got plenty of Bloody Marys for everyone, or yourself, how you do it. So yeah, we're going to roll this footage and talk our way through it.
Roll the tape.
Yeah. So yeah, we're just gonna make a Bloody Mary mix. It's a simple Bloody Mary mix, and it's actually the base for this recipe is on the Ketel One website. So check that out. But yeah, so as I pointed out, there's tomatoes, and we're gonna put a little horseradish in there. We're using different herbs and spices, so black pepper, salt, smoked paprika, a little bit of garlic, hot sauce and Worcestershire sauce and all the things, some basil that I grew. We're gonna throw that all in there. But the most important thing is obviously your tomatoes. So what we need to do is juice those tomatoes in a way that makes sense. So in order to do that, we're just gonna cut them up really. We're gonna not like too much because we're gonna put them on the stove in just a second, but we just want to allow them to be able to stew down and pull out as much of that flavor and those juices because you want that. We want the flavor of this Bloody Mary mix to actually be of tomatoes, of awesome. So, yeah. I'm also going to throw a little bit of garlic in there, and we grew a jalapeno, and so we're going to throw that in there too. They were really hot, so it's going to be a lot less than what I cut up, but that's okay. So yeah, so you're going to want to throw those tomatoes on the stove. You want to bring them up. Like I got that pan super hot, and then turned it down, let them simmer for about 15 minutes. You want to really stir so that those tomatoes break down. And that's really the deal. So you're just trying to get the tomatoes to break down as much as possible. And then you can add all of your other things. So in this case, it was a garlic clove, a little bit of jalapeno, lemon juice. Yeah, we added, in this case, just essentially 2 ounces. They were giant lemons, so 2 ounces of that in there. Okay, all right, there we go. And the basil, just threw some of those leaves in there as well. And again, we're just letting all of this simmer and meld together. We're gonna throw a little black pepper on there. Again, I feel like when it comes to spices, it's all in just what you want to do and what you want to taste. And so a bunch of salt, because that is our flavor enhancer in some ways. That smoked paprika as well. Black pepper. If you want to throw some cumin in there or something crazy, like go for it. It's good for you. I threw my favorite hot sauce in there as well. So yes, I put the jalapenos in there for the actual flavor, but then my favorite hot sauce is delicious. So I want that all the time. Then we're gonna throw a little horseradish in there too. Again, just to sort of add a different sort of herbaceous spiciness to the mix. And sort of let that simmer, let that come together. I mean, you're really letting that simmer for just a couple of minutes, and stirring it in, cooking it down, and finishing up those tomatoes. Again, the tomatoes are the star here. So I threw all of that into for me into a quart container and blended it with a immersion blender. But feel free to throw that into your blender at home. Just blend it up, nice, get it all liquidy. And then we're gonna strain it. That's the next part. So in this case for me, the easiest was just a fine mesh strainer and go into town on that. And so there are always other hacks as well. Like if you have a Vitamix, you always can remember too that as your Vitamix runs, it also can cook because of that friction. And so you can sort of cut out a step there too, potentially, if that is something you have. Yeah, so we're just going to strain this all out into, in this case, it was a mason jar because that's what I had, but you want to strain it into a bottle or something that you can throw in the refrigerator. Yeah. Okay, move that funnel layer. There we go. Yeah, so there you go. And then that's it. Like you're done. You have an awesome Bloody Mary mix that you can then make a marvelous Bloody Mary cocktail from, which we'll show that in just a second as well. Yeah, me too.
Your knife skills and cooking skills are very, very speedy.
Oh yeah. The wonder of movie magic is what's going on there. But yeah. The good news, for this specifically, as you saw that bunch of tomatoes, those were mostly tomatoes that we grew, and then I had friends that grew some other varietals of tomatoes that we happened to have, and so I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna take that and
try them all at the same time.
Use those too. Yeah, just kind of blend them all in there together. And you're, for, I guess, technically speaking, for about a 500 milliliter bottle of Bloody Mary mix, I mean, you want to use about 1.5 pounds, maybe 2 pounds max, I think, really, of tomatoes. Obviously, if your tomatoes are juicier, then easier. If they're more paste-like, then you have to do that as well. But yeah, do we have that other video?
Yep, right around.
Oh yeah, let's do it. Perfect. Yeah, so let's make a Bloody Mary. It's very easy now because we did all the hard work a second ago. In this case, we're going to take 3 ounces of that Bloody Mary mix that we just made, and throw it in a shaker tin. You can do this a myriad of different ways. I think this works. This is just the easiest. I know, so this is the way we did it. Yeah. And then, of course, the star of the show, we're going to add Ketel One Vodka, 1.5 ounces, or whatever.
Your call. Totally your choice.
Yeah, your call. Whatever makes your Bloody Mary the most awesome for you.
And are you always like a pro tomato, like a bloody mix versus like bloody water? Have you ever messed with water?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the fun thing, especially when you're growing your own tomatoes. You can do it any way you want. And so, in this case, we wanted to, in some cases, blister those tomatoes and get the tomato water that way, which makes more of a sauce. In fact, if you cook it even further down, you can make a tomato paste that you can cook with. That's really great. But I definitely, yes, just literally even just throwing the tomatoes, some great cherry tomatoes in a shaker tin and with a little muddle, can give you some great flavor. I mean, adding a little, taking your Bloody Mary mix and adding a little milk to it and doing a milk wash and clarifying it. If you want to get fancy, you could do that. I mean, the world is your oyster because, again, you did it from start to finish. And, so for us, in this case, I grow in each container of tomatoes, also grow a little bit of basil because they say that the companion planting of basil and tomatoes makes both of them taste better. Is it actually scientifically true? Who knows? But, why not give it a shot and see it? Yeah, exactly. There's a little bit of room in the pot, and especially once you cut those bottom leaves off, it's a perfect place to grow some basil. So did that, and then just garnished with a little bit of extra lemon and a little jalapeno, and then there you go.
You're marvelous, Mary.
A marvelous Mary.
That was bloody marvelous.
That's right. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
That's so awesome, Eric. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ketel One, another round, another rally, and Portland Cocktail Week for having us again. Thank you, Amy. And these Mondays have been exceptionally marvelous, and we will see you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.